Welcome to episode 54, Construction Nation. And this is the best of 2019. This is Sue Dyer, your host of Construction Dream Team. Okay, so this month so far, we have had number 5, number 4, number 3, and today it's number 2 in our top episodes for 2019. I just think that we have been so blessed to have wonderful guests this year. And so we selected the top 5 for sharing again. And these were selected based on the total number of downloads, which is how many people listened overall, and then the month that it was released, and also those ones that received the most comments. Okay, so number 2. This week in our countdown is episode number 18 with Shane Snow. Shane is the author of Dream Teams, a book written after years of researching the top dream teams. Shane believes that the best teams are more than the sum of their parts. And haven't we all seen that when we have a team that's just magical? But he also says that collaboration often falls short. There's more to it than just that. Shane looks at teams through lenses of history, neuroscience, psychology, and business, which makes him fascinating in and of itself. He has written 3 books and many articles for Fast Company, Wired Magazine, the New York Times, and the New York Times actually called him the Wonderkin. And after meeting him and having a chance to talk with him, I'm not surprised. He is such a fascinating person. When he and I finally got a chance to talk, he had just gotten back to New York after 6 months of traveling all over the world, where he's working on several projects, including a Netflix project. He is just exceptional, and it's so interesting to see the way he looks at the world. So I hope that you really will enjoy listening to episode number 18. Here is Shane Snow. Welcome to episode 18, Construction Nation. This is Sue Dyer, your host of Construction Dream Team, where I interview industry leaders and experts so you can learn about the people side of construction and build your construction dream team based on OPE, other people's experiences. The shortest way to success is to learn from others who have been there and done that. I hope that you'll head on over to iTunes and give Construction Dream Team a 5-star rating. To get to iTunes on your phone, click the podcast icon. It's the purple one. And search for Construction Dream Team, and it will come up, and you can subscribe. If you scroll down just a little bit, you'll see the stars. If you click on the star on the farthest to the right, you have given us 5-star rating. Thanks so much for helping us make sure we get higher in the search engine so everyone can find us. So let's dive into today's episode. I am very, very excited to have Shane Snow with us today. He is author of Dream Teams, a book that he took a lot of years to research, kind of the top dream teams around, and I'm sure he'll have a lot of insights for us. So let me just tell you a little bit about Shane. Google says that his new book, Dream Teams, that the best teams are more than the sum of their parts. Sounds familiar to us, doesn't it, everyone? Construction Dream Team? But why does collaboration so often fail and not fulfill this promise? We see that all the time on our projects. So I'm really excited to have Shane share some of his ideas. In Dream Teams, Shane talks about taking us on an adventure through history and neuroscience, psychology, and business. He explores what separates groups that simply get together and those who get together and get better. So with that, I would like very much to introduce Shane, an award-winning journalist, entrepreneur, best-selling author of other books as well called Smart Cuts, Storytelling Edge, and of course, Dream Team. And Shane is traveling all over the world. He speaks globally. He's an expert in innovation, teamwork. He's a great storyteller, as you're going to find out. And he's a founder at large in the media technology company Contently. He's a member of the board of the Hatch Institute, which is a nonprofit for investigative journalism in the public interest. He's written a lot of articles. You might have seen some of his articles. It's in Fast Company, Wired, and New Yorker. He's a fellow at the Royal Society of the Arts and has been called a wunderkind by the New York Times. His work is insanely addicting by GQ, and he wishes that he could be talking about his abs for that. But, that's not for all of us. I just have to agree with that. Also, you'll see him I know many of you are on LinkedIn, jump on LinkedIn and LinkedIn learning section. He has quite a few videos on dream teams, and we can put the link in the show notes for that. So with that, a long introduction. Shane, we're so glad you're here. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. That GQ thing is funny.
So I talked a lot about what your accomplishments are, but I'm sure that there's been a journey to get to where you are. So how did you get to becoming an author of these many books and especially of Dream Teams?
Well, I think that a lot starts with my parents, and they were very different and in sort of a wonderful way, and raised me to think differently about the world, I think, because of their differences. So my dad is an engineer, and we had a big family. I was the first of 7 kids. So to kind of make ends meet, he couldn't just work his engineering job. He also flipped houses. And so I grew up doing some renovation and construction work myself, but also just with these constant lessons from him about how things work. We would take apart car engines, we would tear down walls, and I would learn how things work. And I became really interested in this kind of mindset that he had, which was take things apart, figure them out, and then put them back together again, or find a better way to do the thing that whatever you've taken apart is trying to accomplish. So I grew up with that kind of thing, sort of an entrepreneurial kind of engineering mindset instilled in me. And then my mother was a teacher for deaf students, and she was all about reading and learning. And so growing up, we kids read tons and tons and tons of books. We hardly watched TV. We just read tons of books. We went to the library every week. Every Wednesday, we'd go to the library and we'd come back with a pile of books. And I think because of those things, I grew up wanting to be a writer, but specifically to do kind of what I did with my dad, which is find things that are interesting, take them apart, learn about them, and then write about them. And I've ended up doing that with business writing and psychology writing. And along the way, started a company, started a nonprofit, and have tried to apply these things that I have taken apart and written about to my own work. And so the most recent book, Dream Teams, is about, it was inspired by my challenges as I was co-running a company that's getting bigger and bigger, hundreds of employees, thousands of contractors, and lots of customers. And I realized that my job had gone from someone who does things to someone who helps other people do things. And I wanted to explore what's the psychology behind people who do well in teams. What's the sort of the math of a group of people that can add up to more than the sum of their parts? When does that actually happen? Why does it usually not happen? And use those questions as a jumping off point to explore a lot of history and a lot of science that kind of explains the patterns between teams that do really well together and teams that get slower together, or that destroy things around them or destroy each other when they work together. So that's kind of how I arrived at this.
That sounds absolutely fascinating and so applicable to our teams and our listeners. So jumping into your Dream Team research, what did you find are the greatest strengths of maybe a leader or of these teams? You were talking about why do they happen? Why do they typically not happen? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So when it comes to leadership, we've had this old idea of what a leader should do that goes way back to when we were kind of in ancient cultures, and the way that we survived was by banding together. That's one of the things that's uniquely human is we're very good at working together. And that was how we survived against the elements and, the animals that had bigger claws than we did. So the leader back in the day was the person who gave us the most confidence that we could be safe. It was usually the big person, usually the big guy who would go out and fight the battles and be the first out, to face danger. That was who we generally picked as our leaders, because those were the kinds of challenges, physical challenges that we had. And, as civilization progressed and, humans took over the planet, we started to see the role of a leader as something akin to that, but a little bit different. Really, the leader became the person who had the answers. The danger wasn't necessarily always physical danger, but it was, the unknown, in the same way that the saber-toothed tiger was dangerous. The unknown is dangerous to us. And so we picked leaders who gave us the confidence that they knew the right things to do. And there still is some of this, people who are big and imposing. Our brains still kind of automatically think of them as sort of leadership material. A lot of the ways that people actually choose leaders, whether they're promoting them or electing them, have to do with these kinds of traits: acting like you know what you're doing, and being big and strong. There's all sorts of research that says that CEOs tend to be taller than the rest of the average worker, and some of that is this implicit part of our brain searching for who do we think is the most likely to be a good leader, and that's not necessarily a good measure these days. And I also think that the measure of who's the smartest, who knows the answers, actually is no longer the best type of leader that we should be choosing anymore. And that's based on the research that I've done in the course of this book. Really, the best kind of leader to help us solve today's problems with the challenges we have, with the technology we have, with the amount of people that it takes to get big things done. The leader of tomorrow needs to be the kind of person that can do what ancient leaders did, which is persuade people to work towards something, paint a vision, get people on board. But then they need to be able to help a group of people be smarter than the leader themselves. And if we are constrained by how good or smart our leaders are, we ultimately are limited by that person. But the greatest teams in history have been the teams that have done this, where the group themselves is smarter and greater than any one individual. So a great leader today needs to be able to create that kind of environment, to put the right people together, and to enable them to do better than just the leader themselves.
That's really fascinating, because for years, decades, I have grown to believe that in a group, like a board or a team, project team, internal team, there is a collective wisdom in the team, and that the role of the leader is to allow that collective wisdom to come forth.
Very well put.
And you can trust that collective wisdom. It's there. And the team will do things that are just extraordinary.
Oh yeah.
So
I think that's a great way to put it.
So tell us, okay, so we got a leader, or I'm a leader, I'm challenged with leading my project, and how do I go about creating this dream team?
So there's three kind of ingredients. If you were to boil down the whole message and theory of the book, there's three ingredients, and you can kind of actually use the analogy of baking. I think is pretty good, actually. If you swap out baking ingredients for human beings, more or less, if you're trying to make a cake, the first thing that you run against is you need a lot of different kinds of ingredients in order to make the cake better. So if you have 8 different types of flour, those ingredients are not different enough to add up to something more than flour. You might get really fancy flour if you mix 8 types of flour. I don't know. You might be able to do that, but you're not going to get cake. So it starts in teamwork with what in psychology terms is called cognitive diversity. It's essentially people who can bring different things to the table. They can bring different perspectives, different ways of looking at problem solving, and different skills, different things that they've learned either formally or through navigating life and the world differently because they've lived different lives. Bringing people together who have enough differences in the way they approach problem solving or think about problem solving, that's how it starts. So this idea of cognitive diversity is really interesting. More and more research shows us that what we normally think about when we talk about diversity in business which is usually kind of external factors, male or female, your race, your age, things that are sort of easy to spot. That's usually what people are talking about when they talk about diversity. And those things all very much have an impact on the way we think. So trying to assemble a group of people who have as much sort of not in common in those dimensions usually is pretty effective for gathering people who have different perspectives. But there's lots and lots of other things that can give you different perspectives, besides visible diversity, and that has to do with the kind of life you've led. You really can't get to know exactly what someone can offer to a group without getting to know their story. You don't know where someone's from. You don't know what they've been through. You can guess sometimes by looking at them that they may have been through different things, but all those things sort of wrap together. But that's still not enough to make cake. Even if you get flour and milk and sugar and eggs and chocolate, you still don't have cake if you don't mix the ingredients together. And so that's the second sort of variable when it comes to dream teams. You don't just want people who think differently, who bring different things to the table. You also need them to actually engage in those different ways of thinking. And you need them to combine their skills. So this often doesn't go very comfortably, especially if we're talking about problem solving. We're talking about, sort of battles of thinking. This can be uncomfortable. People who see things differently, who do things differently, will make us uncomfortable. And in psychology terms, we call this cognitive friction. And basically, a great team needs to be able to deal with the differences that invariably lead to confusion or conflict or friction. And instead of thinking of them as something to be avoided, think of them as something to be harnessed. So inviting the differences, because, hey, we can all learn from these. And if we combine, our toolkits together, then we can become greater. But that's not enough to make cake either. So the final variable, the final sort of step in making a dream team is you got to put the cake in the oven. Cake batter might make you sick. It certainly will make you sick if you leave it out long enough. In order for it to become cake, it needs a chemical transformation. And that happens when you add heat, put it in the oven, and it changes, and the whole thing becomes something greater than just the ingredients. And in psychology terms, we call this intellectual humility. Basically what that is it's sort of like open-mindedness. They call it a virtue. It's the thing that sits in between being too stubborn to ever change your mind or to ever, agree with someone you disagree with. And on the other side, being so gullible that you will just flip-flop at any new information. Intellectual humility is about being able to coolly look at situations and decide whether you need to change or not. If you have a group of people who are bringing different things to the table, willing to engage with each other and willing to change, that's the kind of the ultimate formula.
That sounds exciting, and it really makes a lot of sense to me, particularly in a large construction project where actually any project, you have your designer, you have your contractor, you have the owner of the facility coming together, and they have all these subcontractors who might have specialties in their areas. They've all worked on dozens and dozens and dozens of different projects in different ways, and they bring all this together. And sometimes there is a lot of cognitive friction and actually personal friction to kind of get to that point where you can form into this coalesced group. And what I tell teams a lot of times is that if you haven't gone through the friction, you're always going to be flat. So they come together and they avoid the friction, but they kind of have to deal with the friction in a constructive way in order for them to ever really form into a high-performing team. At least that's
Absolutely.
what my experience. Is that what you've seen too?
Absolutely. The more you run away from the hard conversations, the more you avoid stepping on toes, the less likely you will be to resolve things in a way that's better than whoever is the most powerful or whoever has, sort of the control of things. If you want to get better together, you have to address those things. And you're right. Sometimes, this can turn into actual conflict where it becomes personal. And I think that is really the key, is being able to engage in the friction without it getting personal. And, there's a whole set of, kind of skills and maturity that we all need to develop to be able to do that. But that is going to yield much better results. It's more likely to yield results than if you shy away from the conflict, because then you're not adding those ingredients into the mix.
Yeah, that's really what the structured collaborative partnering process that we do allows the team. It helps them to have those norms of behavior where we allow everyone to be open and honest without judgment or minimal
Oh,
judgment,
that's great.
so that we can actually listen to each other. And when we listen to each other, a couple things happen. Once you understand the problem, most of the time we assume we understand the problem, but we don't really. So you
Mhm.
understand the problem, so you're solving the problem together and co-creating solutions. And a couple things happen there. One is that people don't argue with what they help to create, and the collective wisdom of the team will create something that's more durable and maybe even a lot more innovative and possibly a breakthrough. So
That's great.
that's very exciting. So I know that in your research, you did a lot of research on a lot of different aspects. Can you give us an example of how this might work on a large project?
Sure. So I really like using Hollywood as an example when we're talking about big projects with lots of collaborators. So construction would be a natural analogy. And if you think about the way you might film a movie in Hollywood, if you're the director, you're putting together this project, you're the general contractor, or whoever the analog might be, the way you pick the team that works on this is not the same as the way a lot of companies pick their teams, or a lot of us kind of gather up people and we're going to work on something. If you're filming a movie, you don't necessarily go back to the same actors that were in your last movie, because they may not be right for this new project you're trying to do. And you also don't go find the 10 actors with the best GPAs from Harvard. That would be a ridiculous way to cast your movie. If you're a film director, you're going to deliberately cast a group of people who are going to bring out the most in the roles that you need played and the most in each other. And so I like thinking of team building as casting. And also, as a movie director, once you've kind of picked the principal cast and you even have them audition, rather than just looking at, the resume, you're actually having them try out for the specific role. Once you do that, then you gather the crew that you need in order to, accomplish whatever series of challenges you have. And there will be different scenes with different, effects and stunts and lighting and all sorts of things that require specialists with different sets of skills to come together. And it's pretty amazing when you look at the way that a really well-run movie set works, is they will bring in people, and often these will be people who they've worked with in the past, but it's like you're cobbling together a new gang from all the pieces that you've discovered and found in the past, and you're getting them all to work on things together. And people who know how to take down lights and equipment, and who know how to set up sets and do special effects, they're really good at what they do, and the director trusts them to do what they do best. But when there are snags, there will be these problem solving powwows that involve the people who are actually doing the work. The director knows that they need to get the set designer there and not just decide what decision needs to be made. They need to actually engage with the people who are the experts on the ground. And so it's this sort of ongoing rolling of problem solving and bringing people in. And there's a hierarchy, of course, but there's not as much of a hierarchy when it comes to the specific problem solving. It's just about getting the problem solved, and everyone has this very specific goal in mind. We need this scene to get done, and I think that's probably pretty applicable in construction. Whereas we need to put this roof up. Like, we all know the goal, and it's really obvious when you're working in that kind of environment when someone's goal is different, because they're not working with you towards the main purpose. And in a Hollywood set, those people get fired immediately. And it's maybe a little bit harsh, but that everyone has to be on the same team or they're off the team, and that's the way that it works. And I think that's a pretty good example for if you want to move quickly and kind of produce breakthroughs in a big project. Looking at Hollywood is a pretty good bet.
It sounds fascinating, actually, to just wrap your mind around casting the roles. I love that idea for a construction project and also auditioning. Some of the new methodologies for selecting teams now is they give them a case study and they watch how the team actually works through the case study.
Oh,
It's
cool.
very similar to the audition concept. I love that. It's a great paradigm. So, what would be your advice to a project leader who really wants to create a dream team? What could they do?
Well, I mean, I think pointing back to what I was just talking about, having a shared purpose is the most important, I think, thing for leaders to set in terms of setting the table. Everybody needs to know what they're doing and why they're here. And, I think once you have that, allowing people to work the way they need to work in order to do their best work is okay. As a leader, you don't need to tell people exactly how to do their job if they are bringing, what they're bringing to the table. But you do need to be very clear on what the shared purpose is, and people need to be on board with that. Otherwise, it can't start. The other thing I'd say that's related to that is I think understanding the difference between a cult and culture is really relevant for any kind of leader, and I think it's probably relevant to project leaders in construction. Cults and culture share the same root word, and they share something in common, which is that both kinds of groups have a shared devotion to something. A cult and a culture all might be devoted to a idea or a organization or a job or a person, right? A cult of personality. You're all devoted to something. That's what ties you together. It's this shared devotion. The difference between a cult and a culture is in a cult, you have to behave and think a certain way. Otherwise, you're not part of the group. Whereas a culture, you're actually asked to contribute something from sort of unique, like you're bringing something to the party so that everyone can move forward towards this thing that their shared devotion is. And I think, a lot of times we actually forget even in like our national culture that what culture really is it's this potluck of people that are all bringing things that help us get towards this thing that we love. And so as a leader, being careful not to tell people they need to be a certain way in order to belong, that they need to think a certain way in order to belong. As long as they share the devotion to the purpose, as long as they're on board with going where you want to go, letting the little things that make people happier, make them who they are, letting those be okay. Letting people work the way that they want to work is okay, because then you are reinforcing this idea that you want them to bring something to the table so the group can be better and not just conform to the way that things are always done or the way that you see them. And some situations, especially with people who are not as skilled or experienced or whatever it is, you might need to be, as a leader, more prescriptive with how people should do a job. But letting people show up as who they are is the point, rather than sort of forcing them to show up as you.
The idea of shared purpose is exactly, again, going back to structured collaborative partnering, that common purpose is what's essential. When you're bringing together all these different companies on a large project, it might be over 100 different entities coming together. And what unites them is the shared purpose. But I have to say that I see an awful lot of projects, really large ones. You see those ones in the news where there was no shared purpose. Everyone came with their own purpose, their own self-interest, and they ended up working against each other, and chaos sort of broke out. And once that ball kind of gets rolling, it's very hard to bring it back. So it's at the very beginning, it's so important to define what the shared purpose is and what the goal is. And the project teams that you're right, of the project teams I've seen that have been really, really successful, every person on that job knew what the shared purpose was and what they were trying to achieve. And they could tell you. So I think that's really, I love the idea of cult and culture as well, because that collaborative culture is essential, but without the shared purpose, it's kind of difficult to achieve.
Yeah, and it makes, really often we have people who we bring on to collaborate with us who are extremely good at what they do. But, being extremely good at what you do, if it's not moving toward the thing that we want to do, is very counterproductive. And that's one of the harder decisions to make, is to not include, or to, to get rid of someone who's so good, but they're not working with you. They're working for their own goals. That can be really difficult, but I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I see quite a bit where you get this local optimization, but you lose the global optimization. So you just end up, it takes a long time a lot of times to give up on that, but you have to at some point.
Yeah.
So what do you see as the barriers to creating dream teams that create extraordinary results? So what are some of these barriers that you're seeing or you saw in your research?
The biggest one is something that we brought up briefly already. It's not talking about the important issues. There's this concept called organizational silence, which is basically a fancy way of saying that, not talking about the important issues, and then that can hide behind sort of friendliness and small talk. If you avoid talking about the elephant in the room by talking about the weather or the football game, that's not getting at the heart of things. And so it's leaning away from the important conversations, the cognitive friction. That is one of the biggest barriers. And on the other side is in my book, I talk about having this sort of ideal zone that you're operating in, where everyone's adding, everyone's contributing, you're kind of rolling with things, people are changing on the fly, but there's tension, there's constant tension. And having no tension means that you're liable to not perform the way that you could, because you're going to be limited by whoever is in charge. And having too much tension is bad, because then you fall apart and things blow up. The goal becomes getting rid of the tension or getting rid of the other people rather than fulfilling the purpose. And so I think that there's skills that we often don't have, or we often haven't developed very well, that become those barriers. So it's not having the skills to bring up important things, to have hard conversations, or not having the toolkit to kind of do so with humility, right? And not having the toolkit to change your mind or to help other people, change course with while saving face. Those are the kinds of things that become barriers, because then the dynamic of a group, or even your own kind of incentive, becomes about preserving your place in the group, preserving your identity, preserving your ego or respect or your job or whatever it is, rather than working forward together. And so those, I think, communication is what often these kinds of things boil down to, being able to bring up and have conversations that are uncomfortable without making them personal, without taking them personal, and being able to change your mind. Easier to say that than to do that, but I think those are the things that get in the way more often than lack of skill.
Yeah, I love the idea of need of tension, because I do see that there has to be some creative tension or pressure to push forward, and not just rest on your laurels. But I do also see when there's just the team believes it's not possible, or there's so much tension that the stress level is so high that they become dysfunctional. It seems like if you were a leader, one of the most important things you would do is just keep the pulse on that on your team, and try to put your foot on the gas sometimes and put it on the brakes sometimes, to try to keep in that optimal zone. I think that's a very good way of looking at it. That's really
cool. That's absolutely right.
So for you personally, you've been on quite a journey, and I know you've been recently on a journey, which I want to make sure we talk about before we end. But tell me a little bit about, what was something that has been a challenge for you, your wonderkind that you are. What has not gone as well as you'd like? I mean, I'm sure not everything has always been perfect. So what was a challenge? Take us back to that moment for you.
So while we're talking about dream teams, in the epilogue of the book, I wrote kind of a personal story. The book is not really about me, but I wrote a personal story about kind of one of the worst moments in my life that I've been thinking about, a lot ever since. And it was basically a series of events kind of happened at once, where I was building a company. I was, it was years ago. So my first book had come out. I was really excited about that. But so on the surface, everything seemed like it was going really well, but behind the scenes, things were not going well. Things in the company were getting hard, and I was going through a divorce, and at the same time, I got a cancer diagnosis, which it turned out that after some tests and some treatments was not cancer, it was something else. That now I'm doing okay, but very sort of terrifying and depressing time in my life, and when you think about teamwork, a marriage is the kind of partnership where you expect two different people to come together and to be better together. And, and in my case, it wasn't. And a lot of people who've been through breakups or divorces, realize how painful that is, that it's not just losing the person. It's not just the end of a relationship, but it's also that sort of so-called failure to achieve that promise of being better together. And that really hurts. So, it's obviously a very painful time in my life. And I think that it has served a couple of roles in my life since then, thinking about it. One is it was pretty humbling to be in this situation. And there was a whole lot of stuff that, we don't need to get into that happened throughout this. But it made me realize that I'm not as cool as I think I am, that, that things in life will be hard and I need to be more equipped to deal with them, deal with it when, things are not going so well. And it really was the first time in my life that a lot of things were going wrong. So it's something that I needed to learn. But the other thing that I learned that I think is really relevant to this, and the reason I put it in the book, is the way that I got through that really hard time in my life was by letting other people help me, by admitting that I needed help, that I did not have the answers, that I was not doing well. I needed counsel. And I had a couple really great people in my life step in and tell me what I needed to hear, help me out. A lot of people, helped me out at that time. And you realize during those moments when you open up, kind of like we were talking about with, speaking up about the real issues, when I started talking about what was going on with me, rather than just pretending everything was okay and, making small talk. When I started talking about the real things, people opened up with their own stories of things that they'd been through that were similar. And that really helped me get through it. And also people offered to help. And, you can't offer to help if you don't know something's wrong. And admitting that something's wrong, admitting that, in my mind that I had failed. And I don't think people thought of it that way, but, that I was unhealthy and that I was, coming out of an unhealthy relationship. People understand. And they were great to me about that. And so I learned that, we need each other more than we think, and that it's okay to not be able to do everything yourself. I think I maybe had a bit of a Superman complex before that. And this really hard experience broke me down in a way that even my research on teamwork making us better hadn't. And so I think I've approached my work and my life differently since then, in earlier than the crisis, asking people to help me, confiding in people more, and realizing that we're all part of a team here, whether we're talking about life or actual work projects.
I agree completely that it is. We all have had challenges. I mean, people that think that there aren't any haven't talked to somebody enough. Everybody
Right.
has that. Yeah. So yeah, and that we are all connected and we all desire to be connected. That's why teamwork is so awesome. Can give you so much fulfillment. So what is the very best advice you've ever gotten?
The thing that comes to mind actually segues really nicely with what I just talked about. My dad would always say when we were kids that people are more important than stuff. He'd always say that. And my mom, the thing that always sticks out to me of this lesson, he talked about it a lot, but it sticks out that my mom was always hitting things with the car. She'd back into the gas pump, or she'd, put the van in a ditch or something. And it happened a lot, and it must have been really frustrating for my dad. But I just remember every time something like that happened, or, she'd drop something and break it, he would never say something mean, or he'd never worry about the car or the thing that got broken. He'd always worry about my mom. We saw that as kids, and he'd always tell us, people are more important than stuff. Mom is more important than the car. Mom's more important than the vase, that got broken. I think that's the best advice, not just in life, but also when it comes to work. If people are the most important thing then you'll think about teamwork differently. And you'll think about the kinds of people who are making it worse for other people around you on your team. It makes the decisions of who stays and who goes and who to include, who to not include, makes those decisions easier when you think about life in terms of people are the most important thing. People are more important than money or objects or whatever. All that stuff will work out if we take care of people.
That's interesting because my parents told me exactly the same thing. That's funny.
I think it's so important.
So I want to just have a little bit of time to chat a little bit about your new project you're under. So we have a little bit of an overview of what we can look forward to. So tell us a little bit about this new adventure you're on.
Well, so I have been traveling around the world, mostly in Latin America and a little bit in Asia. I got rid of my apartment lease in New York and started traveling for it's been 6 months, and I'm actually now back in New York, but the travels will continue. And part of what I wanted to do was live in some other cultures, and some of the research that ended up in the book talked about how spending time with people who don't live life like you, whether it's in your country or not, can help you develop this intellectual humility. So I wanted to do that, but I've also been working on some new research that'll turn into more projects like these on leadership and self-improvement, and also some stuff that's going to end up in television. So I don't know how much to sort of share now while things are in progress, but I've been really excited to explore these different areas. And I guess I could talk about one project that is the furthest along. Is we're exploring for this television show different immigrant communities in America, so surprising pockets of immigrants, and getting to know the grandmas who have these great immigrant stories of the home that they left so they could come to provide a better life for their kids and grandkids. And the show is actually a cooking show at the same time. So it's getting to know people who live in these surprising groups of people, like say the Syrian neighborhood in Twin Falls, Idaho, that kind of thing. Groups that you wouldn't expect if you weren't from the area to live there, and their stories and their food. And I believe that's the one that I started talking to you about Sue before. But that's very much links to this idea that we need each other. If teamwork is about becoming better together because we're different, that's exactly what every great country is built on, is different people coming from different places to make their lives better, but everyone else's lives better too. And the more we get to know each other's stories, the more we'll be able to include each other and to work together and to not be so nervous about the conflict that comes with different cultures matching together. So that's a project that's in the works right now.
That's very exciting because I would agree wholeheartedly. It is our differences that makes us strong. It's that I see something a little bit differently than you do, or my experiences allow me to see something in a different way. And that when we're bold enough to actually listen to each other, we all get smarter.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and a lot of people, I hear people sometimes question, well, if differences, make us strong or make us smarter, then how come they also lead to conflict? How come we have so many problems with people who are different? And I think it's exactly the point of what we've been talking about, that it can turn out badly if we don't lean in, if we don't seek to understand, if we don't engage, and then if we aren't willing to change on both sides. And I think that's the difference between any kind of group of people that are different being more successful, getting better together, being thrilled about their differences, and groups of people that are nervous about their differences, because it's not engaging.
Yes. So I always like to leave a resource for our listeners for Construction Nation. So you got something that you might share with Construction Nation. We will definitely put a link to your Dream Team's book on your show notes page. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
So my website is just my name, shanesnow.com, and you can find a lot of articles there on leadership, a lot of the stuff that we've talked about. And actually, there's a link in particular that I think could be useful for anyone that is interested in digging into this concept of intellectual humility, which I only briefly talked about. If you go to shanesnow.com/IH for intellectual humility, that will lead you to a little self-assessment where you can actually take this quiz and sort of determine what areas of your own personality, ego, humility, confidence you can work on. And it will give you some articles and resources to read. So I would love anyone who's listening who wants to become a better team member to check out that link. That would be awesome.
That's awesome. We will definitely put it in the show notes too if people forget. So how can we get in touch with you?
Same place, shanesnow.com, but you can get to my LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter and everything from that link.
So do you have some parting advice that people could put into action starting tomorrow?
Let's see. Well, I would say, take that intellectual humility test, but I'll give one. There's a couple of little habits that you can do to just start operating with intellectual humility and getting people around you to do the same thing. If you want someone to be willing to change their mind because of something you're arguing or saying or opining, then you need to express that you're willing to change your mind as well. And I think a cool bit of advice comes actually from Ben Franklin. He had this habit where whenever he was about to express a strong belief or opinion about something, he would start off by saying, I could be wrong, but I really think this. And by doing that, what he was doing is making it safe for someone to disagree with him by admitting that he could be wrong. So that makes it safe. And it also makes, the person who he's talking to less defensive about pushing back if they want to, because he wanted people to push back. But it also made it so that if someone persuaded him that his point of view was wrong, it was safe for him to change his mind because he had already said, I could be wrong. And guess what? He was right about that. The very first thing he said, he was right about it. He could be wrong. And
pretty smart.
So I think that's a little habit. Think about things like that, rather than being so certain it's absolutely this way. Leave yourself some room so that you can still be confident, but say, you know what? If there's new information, if you can persuade me, I will change my mind. And that will change the way everyone around you interacts when you're having hard conversations. So that's one little bit. There's definitely more on my website that you can dig into, but there you go.
That's awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much, Shane, for spending time with us and taking time to share about your research and a lot of things that I know will be very helpful to Construction Nation as everyone works hard to build their construction dream team. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you, and good luck to everyone.
Okay, Construction Nations, don't forget, dream teams don't just happen. They're built one step at a time. So take that quiz at shanesnow.com/IH and let me know what you find out if you have any insights. And also, don't forget that collective wisdom is there for you to access if you really work to build your team. So use this episode as a tool. Send it out to your entire team so they can hear the insights that Shane has shared from his research and have a discussion about it, have a dialogue. Because the more people you have involved, the more people you have coming together, the faster you can build your construction dream team. And don't forget that we have started a Construction Dream Team LinkedIn group. I know millions of construction folks are out there on LinkedIn, so please join Construction Dream Team LinkedIn group. We are going to have conversations there, and I hope Shane will jump in and share some at some point with us there. We'll pick a time, and we'll just be there, and we'll be there to answer questions and to listen to what you have to say and to share ideas and concepts. So please join Construction Dream Team LinkedIn. We drop every Monday morning at 4 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time now. Please join me next week when I interview another industry leader or expert about the people side of construction. Thank you so much, Shane, for joining me.
It's absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you. You're so great. Thanks for being here, everybody. I'll catch you next time. Take care.